Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from and don't forget to click subscribe. Ashton's trapped between Keon and Cade in a locked cell. The alarm screams. Guards approach. His father, the warden, will discover everything, but the twins' hands don't stop claiming him. "You're ours," they whisper against his skin. "Forever." Before we begin, if you want to hear uncensored stories, the ones too hot for YouTube, check out my Patreon in the description. Now let's get into it. Ashton Reed had made a terrible mistake, and he was about to pay for it in ways his sheltered, privileged life had never prepared him for. Standing in the warden's office at Riverbend Maximum Security Prison, surrounded by concrete and steel and the faint smell of industrial cleaner that couldn't quite mask the underlying scent of violence and testosterone, he felt his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. His father, Warden Gerald Reed, sat behind a massive oak desk that seemed designed to intimidate, his expression a mixture of paternal concern and administrative frustration as he looked at his only son. "You understand this is highly irregular," his father said, fingers steepled, in that way that meant he was choosing his words carefully. "Having you work here, even in a consulting capacity, opens us up to accusations of nepotism. But given your credentials and the fact that our lead psychologist just quit without notice, we're in a bind." Ashton nodded, trying to project confidence he absolutely did not feel. 23 years old, fresh out of graduate school with a master's in criminal psychology, and utterly, completely inexperienced in every way that mattered. Not just professionally, though God knew he'd never actually worked inside a prison before his internship had been at a nice suburban counseling center where the worst thing he'd dealt with was a teenager with mild anxiety. But personally too, in ways that made his cheeks flush with embarrassment whenever he thought about it. He was a virgin, not just technically, but thoroughly. He'd never been touched by anyone beyond a few awkward kisses in college that had gone nowhere because something had always felt wrong, off, like he was performing a role rather than actually feeling anything real. He'd told himself it was because he was focused on his studies, because he was waiting for the right person, because he was demisexual or demi-romantic or whatever label made it sound intentional rather than the truth, which was that he simply hadn't wanted any of the people who'd expressed interest. They'd all been nice, appropriate, the kind of partners his father would approve of. And that had been precisely the problem. But he couldn't think about that now. Not when his father was going over safety protocols and warning him about certain inmates to avoid, and making it very clear that this was a trial period to prove himself. The prison was understaffed, overcrowded, and dealing with gang tensions that had already resulted in 3 fights this month. Ashton's job would be to conduct psychological evaluations, lead group therapy sessions, and provide individual counseling to inmates deemed high risk for violence or self-harm. It was important work, meaningful work, and absolutely terrifying for someone who looked like he did. Ashton knew what he looked like. He'd spent his whole life being told he was pretty, delicate, too soft for the real world. At 5'9", he was shorter than most men, with a slender build that came from good genetics rather than any actual athletic ability. His hair was light brown with natural golden highlights, falling in soft waves that he kept trying to style professionally, but that always ended up looking slightly tousled. His eyes were green, his skin fair and unblemished, his features refined in a way that his father said came from his mother's side of the family. He looked, in short, like someone who should be teaching elementary school or working in a bookshop, not walking the cell blocks of a maximum security prison. The other guards had made their opinions clear during his brief orientation that morning. "Looks like the warden's bringing in his baby boy to play psychologist," one had muttered. "Not quite quiet enough. Give him a week before he runs crying." Ashton had pretended not to hear, had focused on memorizing the layouts and procedures and emergency codes, but the words had stung because they were probably true. He was soft, sheltered, completely unprepared for the reality of this place. His first real test came that afternoon when he was assigned to conduct intake evaluations on 2 new transfers from the state pen. Identical twins, his father's assistant had informed him, her expression tight with something that might have been concern or warning. Keon and Cade Lynch, gang leaders, both serving life without parole for murder, racketeering, and a list of other charges that took up an entire page. Extremely dangerous, extremely intelligent, and extremely manipulative. They'd been separated at their previous facility due to concerns about their combined influence, but a court order had mandated they be kept together for medical monitoring after an incident that the file didn't fully explain. Do not see them alone, his father had insisted when Ashton mentioned the assignment. Always have a guard present, preferably two. Do not let them get in your head. They're very good at reading people, at finding weaknesses and exploiting them. You stay professional. You keep the desk between you and them, and you do not engage with any personal questions they might ask. Understood? Ashton had understood. He'd read the files, thick folders full of incident reports and psychological assessments that painted a picture of two men who were as ruthless as they were charismatic. Keon Lynch, the older twin by 7 minutes, was described as the strategist, the one who planned and calculated and never made a move without thinking 3 steps ahead. Cade Lynch, the younger, was the enforcer, the muscle, the one who carried out whatever his brother designed with brutal efficiency. Together, they'd built a criminal empire from nothing, taken over territory through a combination of intelligence and violence that had made them legends on the streets before they were 25. Now 31, they'd spent the last 6 years in the system, and from what Ashton could tell from the reports, they'd simply transferred their operation inside the walls. They ran protection rackets, controlled the flow of contraband, and somehow maintained iron discipline over their crew, despite being locked in separate cells for 23 hours a day. The fact that they were being allowed to be together now, even under supervision, suggested they'd leveraged something significant to force the administration's hand. Ashton straightened his tie, smoothed down his shirt, and checked his appearance in the small mirror by the door. He looked even younger than his 23 years, he realized with dismay. Fresh-faced, nervous, exactly like someone who could be eaten alive by predators, who'd spent years learning to spot weakness. But he couldn't back down now. Couldn't prove every doubt right by refusing the assignment. He was a professional, damn it. He had training, education, protocols to follow. He could handle 2 inmates for a 45-minute evaluation with guards present. The evaluation room was small and deliberately sparse, nothing that could be used as a weapon, a metal table bolted to the floor, 4 chairs that were surprisingly comfortable, despite their institutional appearance, and a panic button hidden under the table edge that Ashton had been shown during orientation. 2 guards stood by the door, both large men who looked capable of handling trouble, and that should have been reassuring. Should have been. Then the door opened, and Keon and Cade Lynch walked in, and every coherent thought in Ashton's head simply evaporated. They were identical in a way that was almost unsettling, both standing well over 6 feet tall with the kind of powerful builds that came from years of prison workouts and natural athleticism. Their skin was a rich, deep brown, smooth and unmarked on their faces, but Ashton could see the edges of tattoos crawling up their necks from beneath their orange jumpsuits. Both had their hair cut close to their scalps, emphasizing the perfect symmetry of their features, strong jaws, high cheekbones, full lips, and eyes that were such a dark brown they were almost black in the fluorescent lighting. But it wasn't their physical appearance that made Ashton's breath catch and his heart start racing. It was the way they looked at him, not with the casual disrespect he'd gotten from the guards, not with the resigned boredom of inmates going through another pointless evaluation. They looked at him like predators who'd just spotted prey, with an intensity that made him feel stripped bare, not like they could see through his professional clothing to the anxious virgin beneath, like they knew every secret thought he'd ever tried to hide. Keon, he thought it was Keon, the one with a small scar above his left eyebrow, sat down first, moving with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for someone his size. His brother took the chair beside him, and suddenly the room felt much smaller, the air thicker, charged with something Ashton couldn't name, but that made his skin prickle with awareness. "Good afternoon," Ashton managed, pleased that his voice came out steady despite the way his hands wanted to shake. "I'm Dr. Reed, and I'll be conducting your intake evaluation today. This is a standard procedure for all transfers, and should take approximately 45 minutes. I'll be asking questions about your adjustment to the facility, and any concerns you might have, and your mental health status. Your participation is voluntary, but I encourage you to answer honestly, as this evaluation will inform your treatment plan and housing assignments." The words came out exactly as he'd practiced, professional and measured, and for a moment, Ashton felt a flicker of confidence. He could do this. It was just an evaluation, just questions and answers, nothing to be nervous about. Then Keon smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile, not reassuring or warm. It was the smile of someone who found something amusing in a way that meant trouble for whoever had caught their attention. "Dr. Reed," he said, and his voice was like smoke, dark and smooth and somehow intimate despite the formal setting. "We appreciate you taking the time to see us. These evaluations can be so tedious, but something tells me this one might be interesting." His brother Cade made a sound that might have been agreement, his eyes still fixed on Ashton with that unnerving intensity. "Let's start with some basic questions," Ashton continued, pulling out his evaluation form and focusing on the paper instead of the two men who seemed to be taking up all the oxygen in the room. "How are you adjusting to Riverbend? Any concerns about your housing assignment or interactions with other inmates?" "Normal enough," Keon answered, but he didn't look away from Ashton's face. "The accommodations are adequate. The food is terrible, but that's universal in these places. As for interactions with other inmates, we don't have concerns. Others might have concerns about interacting with us, but that's their problem, not ours." There was something in the way he said it, the casual confidence that suggested he wasn't being arrogant so much as stating simple fact. These were men who were used to being feared, used to command, and they hadn't lost any of that presence despite the orange jumpsuits and restraints. "Have you experienced any threats or violence since your arrival?" Ashton asked, checking boxes on his form and trying to maintain professional distance. "No," Cade answered, speaking for the first time, and his voice was slightly deeper than his brother's, rougher. "We've made it clear that we're not interested in the usual prison bullshit. People respect that, or they learn to." The casual mention of violence made Ashton's pen pause on the paper. "Can you elaborate on what you mean by they learn to?" He had to ask, had to note any indicators of aggressive behavior, but he already knew he wasn't going to like the answer. Keon leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table, and Ashton found himself fighting the urge to lean back, to put more distance between them. "It means we establish boundaries, Dr. Reed. We make it clear what behavior we'll tolerate and what we won't. Most people are smart enough to understand that the first time. The ones who aren't, well, they get a more direct education." His eyes never left Ashton's face, reading his reaction, measuring his response. "You look concerned. Are you worried about our safety, or are you worried that we're the ones other inmates need protection from?" "I'm concerned about maintaining a safe environment for everyone in this facility," Ashton said carefully, aware of how naive he must sound. "My job is to assess risk factors and provide appropriate interventions to reduce violence and promote rehabilitation." A soft laugh from Cade, almost affectionate in its mockery. "Rehabilitation," he repeated. "Doc, you ever actually worked in a prison before? Because that word doesn't mean much in a place like this. Nobody's getting rehabilitated. We're all just surviving until we die." The bluntness of it caught Ashton off guard, stripping away the comfortable distance of his training and forcing him to confront the reality that these men would never leave this place, would spend the next 40 or 50 years in a concrete box until death finally released them. How did you respond to that? How did you offer hope or treatment, or any of the therapeutic interventions he'd learned in graduate school? "I understand the system can feel hopeless," Ashton tried, grasping for something meaningful to say, but mental health support can still improve quality of life, even in difficult circumstances. We can work on coping strategies, emotional regulation, processing trauma. The words sounded hollow even to his own ears, textbook responses that had no weight against the lived reality of life without parole. Keon's smile widened slightly. You really believe that, don't you? You think you can come in here with your degree and your good intentions and make a difference? It's almost sweet. The condescension should have made Ashton angry, but instead he felt his cheeks flush with something that was disturbingly close to embarrassment, like he'd been caught pretending to be something he wasn't. I'm here to help, he said, trying to hold on to his professional dignity. Whether you choose to accept that help is up to you, but I take my work seriously. I take you seriously, even if you don't believe that yet. Something shifted in the air, the mockery fading into something more considering, more dangerous. Cade tilted his head slightly, studying Ashton like he was a puzzle to be solved. How old are you, Doc? The question was against protocol, personal rather than professional, but Ashton found himself answering anyway. 23. I know I look young, but I'm qualified for this position, and I graduated top of my class with specialization in criminal psychology and trauma-informed care. He was babbling, he realized, filling the silence because their attention made him nervous in ways he didn't want to examine. 23, Keon repeated, in exchanging a glance with his brother that Ashton couldn't interpret. Fresh out of school, probably never set foot in a place like this before, and they threw you to the wolves on your first day. That seems almost cruel. The word wolves hung in the air between them, and Ashton realized with uncomfortable clarity that he was the prey in this scenario, that they were the wolves, and that the guards by the door wouldn't do a damn thing to protect him from the kind of danger they represented. Not physical danger, though they were certainly capable of that, but something more insidious. The danger of being seen, really seen, by people who knew how to read every weakness and exploit it. I can handle myself, Ashton said, straightening his spine and trying to project confidence. I'm not afraid of you. The lie was obvious to everyone in the room. Cade's lips quirked in something that might have been amusement or approval, hard to tell. You should be afraid of us, Doc. Not because we'd hurt you, that's not our style, but because you're not equipped for what you're walking into here. This place will chew you up and spit you out, and that pretty face will make it happen faster. Pretty. The word hit Ashton like a physical touch, inappropriate and deliberate, designed to throw him off balance. That's not appropriate, he said firmly, the same tone he'd practiced for dealing with boundary violations. This is a professional interaction, and I expect you to maintain appropriate boundaries. If you can't do that, I'll have to terminate this evaluation. Keon held up his hands in a gesture of peace that somehow managed to be mocking. Apologies, Dr. Reed. My brother misspoke. What he meant to say was that someone with your appearance and obvious inexperience will attract the wrong kind of attention in a place like this. That's a professional observation about your safety, not a personal comment. The distinction was so thin as to be non-existent, but Ashton couldn't call him out without seeming oversensitive. He was trapped in the conversation, dancing to their rhythm, and they knew it. The evaluation continued with Ashton asking his scripted questions and the twins providing answers that were technically cooperative but layered with subtext he couldn't quite grasp. They were playing with him, he realized, testing him, seeing how far they could push before he broke or got angry or ran away. When the 45 minutes finally ended, Ashton felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion and everything to do with the mental energy required to maintain his composure under their scrutiny. Thank you for your cooperation, he said, gathering his papers with hands that only shook slightly. I'll be scheduling follow-up sessions with each of you individually as part of your treatment plan. Looking forward to it, Keon said, standing with that same fluid grace. His brother rose beside him, and they were suddenly much closer to the table, to Ashton, than they'd been before. The guards moved forward instinctively, but Keon just smiled that dangerous smile again. We're going, officers. No need for concern. But Dr. Reed, he waited until Ashton looked up at him, until their eyes met across the table. Be careful in this place. Not everyone will be as patient with your innocence as we are. Then they were gone, escorted out by the guards, and Ashton was left alone in the evaluation room with his racing heart and the uncomfortable realization that he was in way over his head. He'd thought he understood what working in a prison would be like, had studied the literature and reviewed case files and prepared himself intellectually, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of men like Keon and Cade Lynch, for the weight of their attention, or the way they'd made him feel simultaneously seen and exposed, threatened and strangely protected, like they were predators deciding whether to hunt him or claim him. The rest of Ashton's first week passed in a blur of orientations, paperwork, and carefully supervised interactions with inmates who ranged from cooperative to hostile, but none of whom affected him the way the Lynch twins had. He conducted evaluations, sat in on group therapy sessions led by a senior psychologist who clearly resented his presence, and tried to learn the unwritten rules of the prison hierarchy. He discovered quickly that being the warden's son bought him no respect among either guards or inmates. In fact, it seemed to make things worse, marking him as a privileged outsider who didn't belong. The guards treated him with barely concealed contempt, following his father's orders to protect him, but making it clear they thought he was a liability. The inmates were more varied in their responses, some seeing him as a potential resource, someone who might advocate for better conditions or more privileges, and while others viewed him as just another part of the system that had locked them away. But everyone seemed to agree on one thing. Ashton Reed was an outsider who wouldn't last. He tried not to think about the Lynch twins, tried to focus on his other cases and responsibilities, but his mind kept drifting back to that first evaluation, to the way they'd looked at him, spoken to him, made him feel things he'd never felt before. It wasn't attraction, he told himself firmly. It was just nervous awareness, the natural response to being in the presence of dangerous men who represented everything he'd been sheltered from his entire life. The fact that his body had responded, that he'd felt heat low in his belly and his skin had prickled with awareness, that meant nothing. It was just adrenaline, just fear, manifesting as physical sensation. But late at night in his small apartment off campus, Ashton found himself thinking about them in ways that made him deeply uncomfortable, wondering what it would be like to be touched by hands that large and strong, what it would feel like to be held between two bodies that powerful, whether they would be gentle or rough or some combination that made his virgin body ache with want he'd never experienced before. The thoughts were wrong on multiple levels, professional and personal, but he couldn't seem to stop them. He'd touch himself in the darkness, imagining scenarios that would never happen, that couldn't happen, and come with their names on his lips and shame flooding through him immediately after. Friday afternoon brought the individual sessions he'd promised, scheduled 45 minutes each with Keon first and then Cade. The format was the same as before, evaluation room, guards at the door, table between them. But somehow everything felt different when it was just one of them instead of both. Keon arrived exactly on time, escorted by two guards who seemed more alert than usual, like they expected trouble. But Keon was perfectly cooperative, sitting down across from Ashton with that same intense focus that made every nerve ending come alive with awareness. Dr. Reed, Keon greeted him, voice warm in a way that felt deliberately intimate. How was your first week? Learn anything interesting about our little community here? Ashton kept his expression neutral, his voice professional. Today's session is about you, not me. I'd like to discuss your adjustment to the facility and any mental health concerns you might be experiencing. Oh, do you have a history of depression, anxiety, or other mental health conditions that might require treatment? The question was standard, scripted, safe. But Keon leaned back in his chair, studying Ashton with those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through every defense he'd built. I'm not depressed, Dr. Reed. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I was always going to do, Some people are built for lives of quiet desperation in suburban houses with white picket fences. That was never going to be me or my brother. We were always going to end up here, or dead. This was the better option. The matter-of-fact acceptance of a life sentence, the complete lack of regret or remorse, should have been a red flag for antisocial personality disorder. But something in Keon's tone suggested it wasn't quite that simple. That there was a philosophical acceptance rather than pathological inability to feel guilt. "Do you ever think about the people you've hurt?" Ashton asked, genuinely curious now, despite knowing he should stick to the evaluation form. "The families of your victims? The communities you damaged? Do those thoughts cause you distress?" For the first time, Keon's expression shifted into something harder, more guarded. "You want me to say I regret it? That I feel bad about the choices I made? I don't. Everything I did for a reason. To protect my family, to build something that mattered, to survive in a world that was trying to grind us down from the moment we were born. Do I wish things had gone differently? Sure. Do I lose sleep over the people who got in the way? No." He paused, then added more quietly, "The only thing I regret is that my brother is in here with me. He could have had a different life if he'd walked away when I told him to. But he's loyal to a fault, and now we're both serving life because he wouldn't let me face this alone." The admission was surprisingly vulnerable, a crack in the armor that Ashton filed away for later analysis. "You care about your brother very much," he observed, keeping his tone neutral and non-judgmental. "That bond seems to be central to your identity. Tell me about your relationship. What's it like being a twin?" Keon's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Being a twin to Cade specifically is like having half of yourself walking around in a separate body. We've never been apart more than a few days our entire lives. We think alike, move alike, finish each other's thoughts. When they separated us at Rockford, trying to reduce our influence by putting us in different blocks, it was like being cut in half. Neither of us functioned right. That's why we fought so hard to be transferred here together. I don't care about much in this world, Dr. Reed, but I care about him. He's the only person who's ever mattered." "Have you ever been in a romantic relationship?" Ashton asked, following the evaluation form's protocol for assessing social connections. The question came out more curious than clinical, and he cursed himself internally for the unprofessional interest. Keon's lips quirked in that dangerous smile again. "Depends on what you mean by romantic. I've had relationships, physical connections, people I spent time with, but nothing that mattered, nothing that lasted. Most people can't handle what we are. What we've done, the intensity of how we live. They want to domesticate us, make us into something softer and safer. That's not possible. Cade and I, we're a package deal in every sense. Anyone who wants one of us has to accept both of us, and that's a hard sell." He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice even though the guards couldn't hear them clearly from their position by the door. "Why do you ask, Dr. Reed? Professional curiosity or something more personal?" The question sent heat flooding through Ashton's face and down his neck. "Professional curiosity?" he insisted, but his voice came out breathier than intended. "Understanding your social connections and attachment patterns is part of a comprehensive mental health evaluation." Keon hummed, a sound that suggested he wasn't buying the explanation, but would let it slide for now. "Of course, professional. Tell me, Dr. Reed, do you have any romantic relationships? It seems only fair if I'm sharing my personal life with you." "That's not appropriate," Ashton said firmly, falling back on protocols and boundaries. "This evaluation is about you, not about me. My personal life has no bearing on your treatment plan." "Doesn't it, though?" Keon challenged, his eyes never leaving Ashton's face. "Because the way I see it, you're in here trying to understand us, trying to get inside our heads so you can write your reports and make your recommendations. But how can you understand if you've never experienced what we have? If you've spent your whole life safe and sheltered and protected from the kind of reality we live in? You don't know anything about me," Ashton shot back, frustrated by how easily Keon got under his skin. "I'm a professional conducting an evaluation. My background is irrelevant." "You're right. I don't know you," Keon agreed easily. "But I'm good at reading people, Dr. Reed. It's how I've survived this long. And what I read from you is innocence, the kind that's genuine rather than performed. You've never been touched by real violence, never had to make impossible choices, never experienced the kind of desire that makes you forget every rule you're supposed to follow. Am I wrong? Ashton couldn't answer. Couldn't force words past the tightness in his throat because Keon was absolutely right, and they both knew it. The silence stretched between them, loaded with acknowledgement and something else. Something that felt dangerous and thrilling in equal measure. Then Keon sat back, releasing him from the intensity of that gaze. I've enjoyed our conversation, Dr. Reed. Same time next week? The casual dismissal felt like whiplash after the intimacy of the previous moment. Ashton nodded mutely, scribbling notes on his evaluation form that would probably be illegible later because his hands were shaking slightly. The session with Cade followed a similar pattern, though his approach was more direct, less philosophical. Where Keon engaged in verbal chess, testing and probing and circling around points, Cade simply stated what he wanted Ashton to know. You're going to hear a lot of stories about us, Cade said about 10 minutes into their session. Some of them are true, some are exaggerated, some are complete bullshit. What you need to understand is that Keon and I, we do what's necessary to survive and protect what's ours. That's always been our code. We don't hurt people for fun. We're not sadists or psychopaths despite what the prosecution claimed at our trial, but we also don't hesitate when action is required. In here, in this place, that makes us dangerous to some people and useful to others. The question you need to ask yourself is which category you fall into. I'm not in any category, Ashton protested. I'm your psychologist, not an inmate. I'm not part of the prison's social hierarchy. Cade's expression said he thought that was naive in the extreme. Everyone in here is part of the hierarchy, Doc. Guards, administrators, medical staff, you. The only question is where you fit and who has power over you. Right now, you're in a vulnerable position. Young, inexperienced, obviously uncomfortable with the realities of this place. That makes you a target for people who prey on weakness. The directness was somehow more unsettling than his brother's subtle manipulation. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that you need protection, whether you realize it or not. And I'm suggesting that my brother and I could provide that protection if you were smart enough to accept it. The offer hung in the air between them, loaded with implications Ashton didn't want to examine. I don't need protection from inmates, he said carefully. The guards are here to maintain safety, and I'm confident in the security protocols. Cade laughed, the sound genuinely amused rather than mocking. The guards? Doc, half of them are on someone's payroll, bringing in contraband or looking the other way for the right price. The other half don't give a shit what happens to anyone as long as it doesn't create paperwork. You think they're going to protect you if someone decides you're worth the trouble? You're the warden's son, which makes you a symbol, a target for anyone wanting to send a message. The bluntness of it made Ashton's stomach clench with fear he'd been trying to ignore all week. You're trying to scare me, he accused. This is manipulation, trying to make me dependent on you. Maybe, Cade agreed easily. Or maybe I'm telling you the truth, that everyone else is too polite or too scared to say. Either way, the offer stands. You want to survive in here, you ally yourself with people strong enough to make sure no one touches you. That's how this place works. What exactly would this alliance entail? Ashton asked, hating that he was even entertaining this conversation. What would you want in return for this protection I apparently need? Cade's smile was sharp and knowing. We'll figure that out when you're ready to admit you need us. For now, just know that we're watching out for you, whether you ask for it or not. Consider it professional courtesy from one predator to potential prey. The session ended not long after, leaving Ashton rattled and confused and deeply concerned about what he'd just gotten himself into. That evening, he sat in his father's office, debating whether to mention the twins' offers of protection. But what would he say? The two dangerous inmates were paying attention to him? That wasn't technically a threat. Wasn't something his father could act on without looking like he was giving Ashton special treatment, so he said nothing, filed his evaluation reports with carefully neutral language. and went home to his empty apartment, where he definitely did not think about dark eyes and dangerous smiles and the promise of protection that felt more like seduction. The weekend provided a brief respite from the intensity of the prison, but Monday came too quickly, and with it a crisis that forced Ashton to confront exactly how naive he'd been about his safety. One of his patients, a man named Torres who he'd been seeing for anger management, cornered him in a corridor between sessions. The hallway was supposed to be secure, patrolled regularly, but somehow Torres had slipped away from his escort and gotten access to an area he shouldn't have been able to reach. Ashton didn't realize he was in danger until Torres backed him against a wall, one arm braced above Ashton's head, blocking his escape. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" Torres hissed, his breath stale and hot against Ashton's face. "Coming in here with your fancy degree, asking your stupid questions, writing your little reports. You don't know shit about what it's like in here, about what I've been through." Ashton's training kicked in, the de-escalation techniques he'd learned. "Torres, I understand you're upset, but this isn't the way to handle it. Let's talk about what's bothering you in a proper setting where we can." "Shut the fuck up," Torres snarled, his free hand grabbing the front of Ashton's shirt. "I'm tired of talking, tired of your psychobabble bullshit. You want to know what I'm feeling? I'm feeling like the warden's pretty boy son needs to learn what happens to people who think they're better than everyone else." Ashton's heart hammered with genuine fear now, his finger scrambling for the panic button he always kept in his pocket, but Torres grabbed his wrist and slammed it against the wall hard enough to send pain shooting up his arm. The panic button clattered to the floor, useless. This was bad. This was really bad. And where the hell were the guards who were supposed to be monitoring this corridor? Torres's hand moved to Ashton's throat, not squeezing yet, but the threat was clear. "Maybe I'll teach you some respect. Make sure you understand that you're not safe just because Daddy runs this place." Then a voice cut through the fear, cold and commanding and absolutely terrifying in its calm. "You've got 3 seconds to remove your hand from his throat before I remove it from your body." Torres froze, his head snapping toward the voice. Keon and Cade stood at the end of the corridor, flanked by 2 guards who looked more scared than their prisoners. How the Lynch twins had gotten access to this area, why they happened to be here at exactly this moment, Ashton couldn't begin to guess, but the look on their faces, dark and promising violence, made even Torres reconsider his choices. "This doesn't concern you," Torres tried, but his hand dropped from Ashton's throat. "The kid's mine. Step back." Keon smiled, and it was the most frightening thing Ashton had ever seen. "That's where you're wrong, Torres. He's under our protection, which means touching him is the same as touching us. Now you've got a choice. You can walk away right now, and we'll forget this happened. Or you can continue what you started and discover exactly why everyone in this place knows better than to cross us." The guards, Ashton noticed with mounting horror, did absolutely nothing to intervene. They just watched, waiting to see what would happen, clearly having no intention of stepping between the Lynch twins and Torres no matter what prison policy said. Torres must have realized he was outmatched because he slowly backed away, hands raised in surrender. "We're cool," he said, trying to salvage his dignity. "I was just talking to the doc, that's all. Just talking. No harm done." "Then talk somewhere else," Cade suggested, his voice deceptively mild. "And spread the word that Dr. Reed is off limits. Anyone who needs that message repeated can come see us personally." Torres practically ran down the corridor, the guards trailing after him, and then it was just Ashton and the twins, his back still pressed against the wall, his heart still racing, his wrist throbbing from where Torres had grabbed him. Keon approached slowly, giving Ashton time to protest or move away, but Ashton found he couldn't make himself budge. His legs felt like water, adrenaline crash making him shake. "Let me see," Keon said, his large hand engulfing Ashton's wrist with surprising gentleness as he examined the reddening skin. "It'll bruise, but nothing's broken. You're okay, Dr. Reed. You're safe now." The kindness in his voice, after the cold threat he'd just delivered to Torres, created a cognitive dissonance that Ashton's brain couldn't quite process. "You had him," Cade observed, standing close enough that Ashton could feel his body heat. Torres was a dead man if he'd hurt you. We would have made sure of it. The casual certainty of violence shocked Ashton back to himself. You can't say things like that, he managed, his voice shaky. That's threatening another inmate. That's against policy. I have to report. Keon's hand was still cradling Ashton's wrist, thumb stroking over the reddened skin, in a gesture that should have been comforting, but felt unbearably intimate. You could report it, he agreed. Tell your father that Torres attacked you in an unsecured corridor because the guards whose job it is to protect you were elsewhere. Tell him that we intervened and made it clear you're under our protection. See what happens. What would happen? Ashton asked, genuinely curious despite his fear. What would his father do with that information? He'd either have to acknowledge that his son isn't safe here and pull you out, which would be admitting he made a mistake bringing you in, or he'd have to ignore it and hope nothing worse happens. Either way, it makes him look weak. Cade said it matter-of-factly, like he was explaining basic arithmetic. We offered you protection for a reason, Doc. This place is dangerous for someone like you, and the official channels can or won't keep you safe. So the question becomes, are you ready to accept reality? Ashton looked between them, these two dangerous, violent men who had somehow decided he was worth protecting. He should refuse, should insist on handling this through proper channels, should maintain professional boundaries. But standing there with his wrist still in Keon's gentle grip and Cade's body warm at his side, Ashton realized something terrifying. He didn't want to refuse. Some part of him, a part he'd been suppressing his entire sheltered life, wanted exactly what they were offering. Not just protection, but the dark thrill of being claimed by predators who'd chosen him as theirs. What do you want from me? He asked quietly, needing to understand the price of their protection. In return, I mean. What would I owe you? Keon and Cade exchanged one of those wordless twin communications, entire conversations happening in a glance. Then Keon released Ashton's wrist and stepped back, giving him space to breathe. For now, nothing. You don't owe us anything, Dr. Reed. We protect what's ours, and we've decided you fall into that category whether you agree or not. Later, when you're ready, when you've figured out what you really want instead of what you think you should want, we can discuss the details. But for now, just accept that you're safe. No one in this prison will touch you without going through us first. I'm not yours. Ashton protested weakly, even as his body betrayed him with a flush that he couldn't control. I'm your psychologist, not your property. You're not our property, Cade agreed, and there was something almost tender in his expression. But you are ours. There's a difference. Property implies ownership, possession, taking something against its will. What we're offering is protection, partnership, belonging. You can refuse it. We won't force the issue. But the offer stands regardless of what you decide. They left him there in the corridor, and Ashton stood trembling against the wall for long minutes before he could trust his legs to carry him. What the hell had just happened? In the space of 15 minutes, he'd been assaulted, rescued, and claimed by two of the most dangerous men in the prison. And the most terrifying part was that instead of being repulsed or frightened, he felt drawn to them in ways that violated every professional boundary and personal value he'd ever held. That night, Ashton lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the corridor incident on an endless loop. The fear when Torres had grabbed him, the relief when Keon and Cade appeared, the strange heat that had flooded through him when Keon's thumb stroked his wrist. He should report what happened, should tell his father that the prison wasn't safe, that inmates were making territorial claims over staff members. But every time he reached for his phone, he remembered the twins' words about making his father look weak, about the reality that official channels couldn't or wouldn't protect him. More disturbing was the realization that he didn't want to report them, didn't want to do anything that might result in them being punished or separated or transferred away from him. Because as dangerous and inappropriate as it was, Ashton felt safer knowing Keon and Cade were watching out for him than he'd felt relying on guards who clearly had their own agendas. The cognitive dissonance was making him question everything he thought he knew about himself, about right and wrong, about what he wanted versus what he should want. His phone buzzed with a text from his father. Heard about an incident today. You okay? Word travels fast in a prison, apparently. Ashton typed back quickly. I'm fine. Handled it professionally. No injuries. His father's response came immediately. Good. Can't show weakness in a place like this. I'm proud of you for handling it. The irony wasn't lost on Ashton that his father thought he'd handled the situation, when really he'd been rescued by the very inmates he was supposed to be treating. The next few weeks fell into a strange new pattern. Ashton continued his regular duties, conducting evaluations and leading therapy groups. But now there was an unspoken understanding among the inmate population. Dr. Reed was off limits, untouchable, under the protection of the Lynch twins, and nobody was stupid enough to test whether that protection was real. The change was subtle, but unmistakable. Inmates who'd been borderline hostile before were now respectful, even deferential. Guards who dismissed him now watched him with wary calculation, clearly wondering what arrangement he'd made with two of the most powerful men in the facility. And his scheduled sessions with Keon and Cade became the highlights of his week, something he looked forward to with an anticipation that was absolutely unprofessional. They never repeated their explicit claim that he was theirs, never pushed boundaries in ways he'd have to officially respond to, but the undercurrent was always there. The way they looked at him, the small smiles they shared when he said something naive, the casual touches that lingered just slightly too long to be accidental. Keon, in particular, seemed to take pleasure in making Ashton uncomfortable in the best way. During one session, he'd leaned across the table and said quietly, "You know what I think about when I'm locked in my cell at night, Dr. Reed? I think about how you looked that day. Taurus cornered you. Scared but trying to be brave. Your pulse hammering in your throat where I could see it. I think about how easy it would be to make you feel that way again, but for entirely different reasons." The heat in his voice had made Ashton's breath catch, his professional composure slipping as his body responded to the dark promise in those words. Cade's approach was more direct, more physical. He'd position himself close during their sessions, invading Ashton's space in ways that weren't quite threatening, but were definitely deliberate. Once, when Ashton had dropped his pen, Cade had picked it up and handed it back with their fingers brushing, his large hand engulfing Ashton's smaller one. "You've got delicate hands," he'd observed. "Soft. Never done hard labor. Never had to fight for anything. I keep wondering what they'd feel like on my skin. Whether you'd be gentle, or if you'd have more fire than that innocent face suggests." Ashton knew he should shut down these comments, should maintain professional boundaries, should remind them that he was their psychologist, and this was inappropriate, but he never did. Instead, he'd flush and look away and make some weak attempt at redirecting the conversation while his body burned with want he'd never experienced before. They were seducing him slowly, methodically, breaking down his defenses one careful word at a time. The breaking point came 6 weeks after the Taurus incident. Ashton had stayed late to finish paperwork, the administrative building mostly empty except for a skeleton crew of guards. He was walking to his car in the staff parking lot when he heard footsteps behind him, quick and purposeful. His heart jumped into his throat. Torres's assault still fresh in his memory, and he spun around with his hand on his pepper spray. But it wasn't an inmate. It was 2 guards he vaguely recognized, both large men who'd never been friendly during his time at Riverbend. "Dr. Reed," one of them said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Working late again? You should be more careful. Dangerous for someone like you to be out here alone." The implicit threat made Ashton's skin crawl. I'm fine, thank you. My car's just over there." He tried to move past them, but they shifted to block his path. "The thing is, Doc," the second guard said, "we've been wondering about something. See, word is you've got some kind of arrangement with the Lynch brothers. Special protection, special treatment. Makes a man curious about what you're giving them in return." The insinuation was clear and disgusting, implying that Ashton was trading sexual favors for safety. "That's ridiculous," Ashton said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm their psychologist. Our relationship is completely professional. The guards exchanged knowing looks that made Ashton's stomach turn. "Sure it is," the first guard said. "That's why they threaten to kill anyone who touches you. That's why you spend extra time in sessions with them. That's why you look at them like the way you look at them. We're not judging, Doc. We're just saying that if you're willing to be friendly with inmates, maybe you should be friendly with the people who actually run this place. Maybe then you wouldn't need the Lynch brothers' protection at all." The realization of what they were suggesting, that he should sleep with them in exchange for safety, made Ashton feel sick. "That's never going to happen," he said firmly, his hand tightening on the pepper spray. "Move out of my way or I'm calling security." The guards laughed like he'd said something hilarious. "Security? Kid, we are security. And who do you think they're going to believe? The warden's pampered son or two veteran officers? Maybe you need a lesson in how things really work around here." One of them reached for Ashton's arm, and that's when everything went to hell. Ashton sprayed the pepper spray directly in the guard's face, the man screaming and stumbling back. The second guard lunged at him, grabbing Ashton and slamming him against a car hard enough to knock the wind out of him. "You little shit," he snarled, his hand fisting in Ashton's hair. "You're going to regret that." But before he could follow through on the threat, a voice cut through the parking lot like a whip. "Remove your hands from him. Now." Ashton's head jerked up to see Keon and Cade standing at the edge of the parking lot, having somehow gotten outside the facility despite it being after lockdown. The logistics of how they'd managed that were terrifying, suggesting they had far more freedom and resources than security realized, but Ashton couldn't focus on that. He was too busy trying to breathe through the pain in his ribs where he'd hit the car. The guard holding Ashton froze, clearly recognizing the twins and understanding the danger he was in. "This doesn't concern you?" he tried, but his voice lacked conviction. "Lynch, you're not supposed to be out here. If you're smart, you'll get back inside before this becomes a bigger problem." Keon's expression was utterly calm, which somehow made him more terrifying than if he'd been angry. "The only problem I see is two guards assaulting a staff member in violation of about a dozen policies. Now you've got two choices. You can let Dr. Reed go right now, and we all forget this happened. Or you can continue what you started and see what happens when you touch something that belongs to us." The guard released Ashton immediately, stepping back with his hands raised. "We were just talking to him," he lied. "No assault happened, just a misunderstanding." "Then walk away," Cade suggested, his voice deadly quiet. "And understand that if we ever see you near Dr. Reed again, if we even hear that you've looked at him wrong, there won't be a third warning. There will just be consequences." The guards fled. Whoa, and Ashton would have laughed at how quickly they moved if he wasn't busy trying to stay upright. His ribs ached, his head was spinning, and the adrenaline crash was making him shake so badly he had to lean against the car for support. Keon was beside him in an instant, his large hands careful as they checked Ashton for injuries. "Did they hurt you?" His voice was gentle, concerned, nothing like the cold threat he'd just delivered to the guards. "Talk to me, Ashton. Where does it hurt?" "My ribs," Ashton managed, wincing as Keon's fingers probed his side. "I hit the car pretty hard, probably just bruised, but it hurts to breathe." Cade appeared on his other side, fury radiating from him in waves. "We should kill them," he said flatly. "Both of them. Make it clear what happens to people who put their hands on you." "No," Ashton protested, grabbing Cade's arm without thinking. "No killing, no violence. That would just make everything worse. Please." The fact that he was begging murderers not to commit murder on his behalf should have been absurd, but in that moment, it felt completely natural. Cade looked down at where Ashton's hand rested on his arm, something softening in his expression. "For you," he said quietly, "we won't kill them, but they're not walking away without consequences." "How did you even get out here?" Ashton asked, the logistics finally penetrating his shock. "It's after lockdown. You should be in your cells." Keon shared one of those wordless looks with his brother. "We have our ways," he said vaguely. "Let's just say that enough guards are on payroll that we can move around when necessary. We've been watching you, making sure you got to your car safely." "As good thing we did." Ashton should have been disturbed by the admission that they'd been surveilling him, but instead, he felt a rush of gratitude. They'd been protecting him even when he didn't know he needed it, had somehow known tonight would be dangerous. "You can't keep doing this," he said weakly, even as his body betrayed him by leaning into Keon's touch. "Following me, threatening people, breaking prison rules. Eventually you'll get caught and the consequences will be serious." "Worth it," Cade said simply. "You're worth it. Can you walk? We need to get you somewhere safe, somewhere we can check you properly." Ashton nodded, taking a tentative step and immediately regretting it as pain shot through his side. Keon scooped him up without warning, cradling him against his chest like Ashton weighed nothing. "I can walk." Ashton protested half-heartedly, but he was already wrapping his arms around Keon's neck, accepting the help his body desperately needed. "Sure you can," Keon agreed, his voice rich with amusement. "But this is faster, and I like holding you. Now stop arguing and let us take care of you." They carried him not back into the prison, but to a groundskeeper's shed on the edge of the property, hidden from the main security cameras. Inside, it was surprisingly clean and well-maintained, with a cot in the corner and supplies that suggested someone used this space regularly. Keon laid Ashton down carefully on the cot while Cade locked the door and pulled curtains over the small window. "This is your place?" Ashton asked, looking around. "How do you have access to this?" "Let's just say the groundskeeper is very accommodating when properly motivated," Keon said. "We needed somewhere private we could go, somewhere the cameras can't see, somewhere we could bring you if necessary." He sat beside Ashton on the cot, his hands already working at the buttons of Ashton's shirt. "I need to see your ribs, make sure nothing's broken. This might hurt." Ashton knew he should protest, should maintain boundaries, should insist on going to the prison medical facility where actual doctors could examine him. But he found himself nodding permission instead, letting Keon undress him with careful efficiency. When his shirt was open and pushed aside, all three of them could see the angry red marks already darkening to purple along Ashton's rib cage. Cade swore viciously, his hands clenching into fists. "Those guards are dead men," he said. "I don't care what you say, Ashton. Nobody does this to you and lives." But Keon was more methodical, his fingers gentle as they traced the bruises, checking for signs of serious injury. "Breathe in for me," he instructed. "Deep as you can." Ashton obeyed, gasping when the expansion of his lungs sent pain radiating through his chest. "Nothing feels broken," Keon assessed. "Badly bruised, but you'll heal. We need ice and painkillers, something stronger than what the commissary sells." "I can go to the medical wing," Ashton said. "Get proper treatment and file a report about what happened." The twins exchanged looks again, clearly having an entire conversation Ashton wasn't privy to. "You could do that," Keon agreed. "Tell your father that 2 guards assaulted you in the parking lot because they thought you were sleeping with inmates. Watch him either pull you from this job or increase security in ways that make it impossible for us to protect you. Or," and he paused, his hand resting warm on Ashton's bare stomach, "you could let us handle this our way. Let us take care of you tonight. Make sure you're okay. Let us deal with the guards in ways that don't involve official reports or administrative investigations." "What does your way involve?" Ashton asked, even though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. "For the guards or for you?" Keon's smile was sharp. "For the guards, let's just say they'll wake up tomorrow, understanding that touching you was a mistake they won't repeat. For you, it involves ice, painkillers, and us making sure you're comfortable and safe. Nothing you don't want, nothing you're not ready for. Just care." The promise in those last words made Ashton's breath catch for reasons that had nothing to do with his injured ribs. Cade disappeared, presumably to acquire the supplies they needed, leaving Ashton alone with Keon in the intimate confines of the shed. "You shouldn't be doing this," Ashton said quietly, acutely aware of how vulnerable he was, shirtless and hurting and completely at Keon's mercy. "I'm supposed to be your psychologist, not someone you have to rescue and take care of. This is all wrong." Keon's hand was still resting on Ashton's stomach, his thumb tracing idle patterns on the skin just above his waistband. "What feels wrong about it?" he asked. "The fact that we're breaking rules, the fact that we're not maintaining professional boundaries, or the fact that you like it when we take care of you, when we claim you, when we make it clear to everyone that you're ours?" The directness of the question stole Ashton's breath. He started, then stopped, unsure how to finish. Because Keon was right. It did feel good to be claimed, to be protected, to have someone care about his safety with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. It felt good in ways that terrified him because they revealed truths about himself he'd been avoiding his entire life. "You don't have to answer," Keon said gently. "Not tonight. You're hurt and scared and probably in shock. But Ashton," and he leaned closer, his face inches from Ashton's, "eventually you're going to have to be honest with yourself about what you want, about what we could give you if you'd let us." "What could you give me?" Ashton whispered, his heart racing. "You're serving life sentences. You're dangerous criminals. What kind of future could possibly exist between us?" Keon's smile was sad but genuine. "We can't give you a white picket fence or a normal life. We can't take you on dates or introduce you to our families, or any of the things you probably dreamed about growing up. But we can give you honesty, protection, passion, belonging. We can make you feel things you've never felt before, touch you in ways that will ruin you for anyone else. We can give you purpose and intensity, and the certainty that you matter more to us than anything else in this world. Isn't that worth more than conventional happiness?" Before Ashton could answer, Cade returned with a bag of supplies. Ice packs, industrial-strength painkillers that were definitely not over-the-counter, and bottled water. Ashton took the pills gratefully, washing them down, while Cade prepared the ice packs and Keon adjusted pillows behind him. Then they were both fussing over him, Cade holding ice to his ribs while Keon stroked his hair, and Ashton felt himself melting under their combined attention. When was the last time anyone had taken care of him like this? His father loved him, but showed it through expectations and demands. His friends were casual acquaintances at best. But these two dangerous men treated him like something precious. "Tell us about yourself," Keon said after the painkillers had kicked in and Ashton was floating in a pleasant haze. "Not the professional stuff, not the warden's son. Tell us about Ashton. What do you want that you've never admitted to anyone?" The drugs must have loosened his inhibitions because Ashton found himself answering honestly. "I want to feel things," he admitted. "Real things, intense things. I've spent my whole life being careful and controlled and appropriate, and I don't think I've ever actually felt alive. I see other people experiencing passion and desire, and I wonder what that's like, if I'm even capable of it, or if there's something wrong with me." "There's nothing wrong with you," Cade said firmly, his hand warm where it rested on Ashton's knee. "You just haven't met anyone worth feeling those things for. Have you ever been with someone? Physically, I mean." The question should have embarrassed him, but Ashton was too tired and too drugged to care. "No," he confessed. "I'm 23 and I've never been touched by anyone beyond awkward kisses. Everyone I dated felt wrong, like I was performing rather than actually wanting them. I started thinking maybe I was asexual or just broken somehow. Or maybe," Keon suggested, his voice dropping to something intimate, "you were waiting for something real, something that matched the intensity you're capable of feeling." His hand cupped Ashton's face, thumb tracing his cheekbone. "You're not broken, beautiful boy. You're just particular about who you let in, and you're attracted to danger, to power, to things that scare you as much as they excite you. That's not wrong. That's just honest." Ashton's breath caught at the endearment, at the way Keon was looking at him like he could see straight through every defense. "You don't know that," he protested weakly. "You don't know what I'm attracted to." "Don't I?" Keon challenged. "Then explain why your pupils dilate when we're close, why your pulse races when we touch you. Hey, why you lean into our hands even when you're trying to maintain professional distance. Explain why you're here right now, half naked in a shed with two murderers, feeling safer than you've ever felt instead of terrified. Your body knows what it wants, Ashton. The question is whether you're brave enough to admit it." "I'm scared," Ashton whispered, the truth escaping before he could stop it. "I'm scared of wanting you. Scared of what it means that I do. Scared that if I let you in, I'll never be able to go back to who I was before." You can't go back anyway, Cade said gently. The moment you walked into this prison, the moment you met us, everything changed. You can fight it. Pretend you don't feel what you feel. Maintain your professional boundaries and stay safe. Or you can take the risk. Let us show you what you've been missing. Let us touch you the way you've been craving without even knowing what you were craving. Ashton looked between them. These two beautiful, dangerous men who wanted him with an intensity that should have been terrifying. He should say no, should protect himself, his career, his carefully constructed life, should maintain boundaries and ethics, and all the things he'd been taught mattered. But lying there with Keon's hand on his face and Cade's touch warm on his knee and his body aching for more than just relief from his injuries, Ashton realized he was tired of should, tired of safe, tired of being the good boy who never took risks or felt real passion. If you do this, he said slowly, if I let you touch me, it can't be just physical. I'm not built that way. It would have to mean something. It already means something, Keon assured him. You think we'd risk everything we have here, the control we've built, the life we've made, for just a physical connection? Ashton, we're not just attracted to your body, though God knows you're beautiful. We're attracted to your mind, your innocence, your strength hidden under all that softness. We want all of you, not just the parts that are easy. Then show me, Ashton breathed, making the choice that would change everything. Show me what I've been missing. Keon's eyes darkened with heat so intense Ashton felt it like a physical touch. You're sure? Once we start, once we have you, we're not letting you go. You need to be certain because we don't do casual and we don't share with anyone else. If you're ours completely. I'm sure, Ashton said, and realized he meant it. I'm terrified, and it's probably a terrible idea, but I'm sure. Then Keon was kissing him, and Ashton's world exploded into sensation he'd never imagined. The kiss was nothing like the awkward attempts he'd experienced in college. Keon kissed like he was claiming something that belonged to him, deep and demanding and absolutely devastating in its intensity. His hand fisted in Ashton's hair, angling his head for better access, while his tongue explored with skilled thoroughness. Ashton whimpered into the kiss, overwhelmed and desperate, and completely lost in the feeling of finally being wanted like this. When Keon finally pulled back, Ashton was breathing hard and shaking, his lips swollen and his body aching for more. Cade took over immediately, his kiss different from his brother's, but equally consuming, where Keon had been demanding. Cade was possessive, like he was marking Ashton as his with every stroke of his tongue. Ashton had never been kissed by two people in succession before, had never experienced the disorienting pleasure of being passed between them like something precious they were sharing. When Cade released him, Ashton collapsed back against the pillows, dazed and aroused and completely overwhelmed. How do you feel? Keon asked, his voice rough with barely controlled desire. Ashton struggled to find words. Like I'm on fire, he managed. Like I've never actually been touched before this moment. Like I want more, but I don't know if I can handle more. You can handle it, Cade assured him, his hand sliding up Ashton's thigh with devastating slowness. We'll make sure of it. We're going to take such good care of you, beautiful boy. Going to show you exactly what your body was made for. His hand reached the junction of Ashton's thighs, cupping him through his pants, and Ashton gasped at the sensation of being touched there by someone else for the first time. Please, he whimpered, not even sure what he was begging for. Please what? Keon asked, his own hand joining his brother's in exploring Ashton's body. Tell us what you need. I need, Ashton started, then stopped, embarrassed by how desperate he sounded. I need to feel you, need to know what it's like, need you to touch me properly, because I'm going to die if you don't. Then we'll touch you, Keon promised. Going to make you feel so good you forget your own name. But first, we need to know your limits. Have you ever touched yourself? Ashton nodded, his cheeks flushing. Sometimes, he admitted, but it never felt like much. I could never get to where I needed to be. Because you need more than your own hand, Cade said with certainty. You need someone who knows what they're doing. Someone who can take you apart and put you back together. Let us do that for you. Let us show you what pleasure actually feels like." Ashton nodded permission. Beyond words now, his body strung so tight with need, he thought he might shatter. Keon and Cade worked together with practiced efficiency, removing the rest of Ashton's clothes until he was completely bare before them. He should have felt vulnerable, exposed, but instead he felt powerful in a strange way, like his virgin body was a gift he was finally ready to give. "Beautiful," Keon breathed, his eyes roaming over every inch of revealed skin. "Absolutely perfect." Then he was touching Ashton everywhere, learning the map of his body while Cade held him steady. When Keon's hand finally wrapped around Ashton's arousal, the sensation was so intense that Ashton cried out, his back arching off the cot. "That's it," Cade encouraged, his own hand joining his brother's in touching Ashton. "Let us hear you. Let us know we're making you feel good." They worked him with skilled hands, building his pleasure higher and higher until Ashton was thrashing between them, overwhelmed by sensation he'd never experienced before. "I can't," he gasped. "It's too much, I can't." "Yes, you can," Keon said firmly. "You're going to come for us, beautiful boy. Going to let go and show us how good we make you feel." And Ashton did, pleasure crashing over him in waves so intense he screamed their names, his body convulsing as he came harder than he'd ever managed alone. They held him through it, murmuring praise and stroking his skin until the tremors subsided and he collapsed boneless and satisfied in their arms. That was just the beginning, Cade promised, pressing a kiss to Ashton's temple. "When you're ready, when you're healed, we're going to show you so much more. Going to take you apart completely and make you ours in every way that matters. For now, though, you need rest." The drugs and the release had left Ashton floating, barely conscious, safe between two bodies that had promised to protect him. He should have worried about consequences, about what this meant for his job and his future. But lying there in their arms, Ashton couldn't bring himself to care about anything except how right this felt. The next few weeks were a study in controlled chaos. Ashton continued his work at the prison, maintaining professional distance during official sessions, while his relationship with the Lynch twins deepened in the privacy of the groundskeeper's shed. They taught him what pleasure really felt like, introducing him to sensations and acts he'd never imagined, with patience and skill that made every encounter devastating. But more than the physical connection, Ashton found himself falling for them emotionally. The way they listened when he talked about his dreams and fears, the way they remembered small details about his life, the way they made him feel seen and valued in ways no one ever had. The guards who'd assaulted him never bothered him again. In fact, they requested transfers to different facilities within a week, looking haunted in ways that suggested the Lynch twins had kept their promise about consequences. Ashton didn't ask for details, didn't want to know exactly what had been done to ensure his safety. The other inmates gave him even more space now, word having spread that Dr. Reed was not just protected but claimed, and crossing that line meant dealing with consequences nobody wanted. His father noticed the change, commenting that Ashton seemed more confident, more settled in his role. He didn't notice that his son's shirts sometimes had wrinkles that suggested they'd been hastily redressed, or that Ashton's lips were often kiss-swollen during their morning meetings, or that his son was conducting an extremely inappropriate relationship with two inmates serving life sentences. Ashton told himself he'd end it eventually, that this was temporary insanity brought on by finally experiencing passion for the first time. But every time he tried to create distance, Keon and Cade would pull him back in with words or touches that made him forget why he'd wanted to leave. 3 months into their relationship, Ashton finally gave them everything. It happened in the shed on a rare night when they had several hours uninterrupted. The guards paid off and the cameras disabled. Keon and Cade had prepared the space with care, bringing clean sheets and candles and making it as comfortable as possible given the circumstances. "We want to make love to you properly," Keon had said. "Want to be inside you, feel you wrapped around us, make you ours completely, but only if you're ready." only if you want this as much as we do." Ashton wanted it with an intensity that terrified him. I wanted to know what it felt like to be filled, claimed, possessed by the men he'd fallen in love with, despite every reason he shouldn't have. "I'm ready," he'd said. "I want you, both of you. Show me what it's like." They'd taken their time preparing him, using careful fingers and patience to stretch his virgin body for what was coming. The intimacy of it, being opened by their hands while they murmured praise and encouragement, had nearly undone Ashton before they'd even begun. When Keon finally entered him, sliding inside with exquisite care, Ashton had gasped at the sensation of being filled, stretched, claimed. It burned, but in the best way. Overwhelming pleasure mixed with the ache of his body adjusting to something it had never experienced. "That's it," Keon had encouraged, holding still to let Ashton adjust. "You're doing so good. A beautiful boy. Taking me so well." When he started to move, Ashton had thought he might die from the intensity of it, pleasure building with every thrust until he was sobbing their names and begging for more. After Keon had brought him to completion and found his own release, Cade had taken over, and Ashton discovered that being loved by twin brothers who moved in perfect synchronization was like nothing else he'd ever experienced. They knew exactly what the other had done, how to build on the pleasure rather than starting over, how to play his body like an instrument they'd studied for years. By the time they were finished, Ashton was marked with their possession, bruises from passionate kisses blooming on his throat and chest, his body deliciously sore, and his heart completely theirs. That was when everything changed. He lying between them in the aftermath, Ashton finally admitted the truth he'd been avoiding. "I love you," he said quietly. "Both of you. I know it's insane and inappropriate and probably the stupidest thing I've ever admitted, but I love you and I don't know what to do about it." Keon had cupped his face with infinite gentleness. "You don't have to do anything about it except accept it. Accept that we love you too, that this isn't just physical for us either. We're in this, Ashton, all the way, for as long as you'll have us. But you're serving life sentences," Ashton had protested. "How can we have a future when you'll never leave this place?" "Then you'll have to visit us every day," Cade had said with a smile. "Come see us during work hours and after hours and every moment in between. Build a life that includes us even if it's not conventional. We can't give you everything, but we can give you enough." And maybe that's what Ashton needed to hear, not promises of impossible futures, but the honest acknowledgement that love didn't always look the way society expected it to. He could build a life here, working at the prison, and coming home to men who loved him fiercely, even if they couldn't leave with him. It wasn't traditional, but it was real. The months that followed brought their own challenges. Maintaining the relationship while keeping it hidden from Ashton's father required careful planning and constant vigilance, but they managed, carving out stolen hours in the shed and developing a language of looks and touches that let them communicate even during official sessions. Ashton flourished in his work. His understanding of the prison population deepened by his intimate connection to two of its most influential members. He implemented programs that actually helped people, using the twins' insights to navigate the complex social dynamics in ways his textbook training never could have prepared him for. A year after they'd first met, Ashton made a decision that surprised everyone, himself included. He resigned from his position as prison psychologist and took a job with a criminal justice reform organization that contracted with Riverbend. The new position gave him more flexibility, allowed him to visit the prison without living under his father's oversight, and provided cover for the amount of time he spent there. His father was disappointed, but accepted the decision, yet never suspecting the real reason his son wanted to maintain connection to the facility. On the anniversary of their first kiss, Keon and Cade gave Ashton a gift. 3 matching rings, simple metal bands that they'd somehow acquired, inscribed on the inside with words that meant everything. You are ours, and we are yours. It wasn't legal marriage, couldn't be in any recognized sense, but it was commitment. Ashton wore his ring on a chain around his neck, hidden beneath his shirts, a constant reminder that he belonged to two men who'd seen past every wall he'd built and loved what they found. The future stretched before them, unconventional and complicated, and absolutely perfect. Ashton built a life that honored both his need to help people and his love for Keon and Cade. They built something inside the prison walls that was as real as any traditional relationship, finding ways to be together despite the restrictions. And late at night, when Ashton lay alone in his apartment, he'd touch the ring and remember the way they'd looked at him in that first evaluation, predators recognizing prey and deciding to claim rather than consume. He'd been right to be scared that day, because they had changed him completely, had awakened parts of himself he'd never known existed, had taught him that love didn't have to look conventional to be transformative. Sometimes the greatest love stories were the ones that could never be told publicly, that existed in stolen moments and hidden spaces that defied every rule and expectation. Sometimes you had to be brave enough to choose passion over propriety, intensity over safety, my truth over the performance of normality. Ashton Reed had walked into Riverbend Maximum Security Prison expecting to help rehabilitate dangerous criminals. Instead, he'd been the one rehabilitated, freed from the prison of his own fears and expectations, taught to embrace desire and connection and love in its rawest form. The warden's virgin son had become someone else entirely, someone braver and more honest and infinitely more alive. And the two men who'd made that transformation possible loved him fiercely, possessively, completely, for exactly who he'd become. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that love exists in unexpected places and transforms us in ways we can't predict, subscribe to the channel and share where you're listening from. Because sometimes the most powerful love stories are the ones that break every rule. That exist in the spaces between what's allowed and what's real. That teach us that being brave enough to claim what we want is worth every risk. And sometimes the people who save us are the ones we never expected to need. The dangerous ones who see our innocence not as something to corrupt but as something precious to protect. This was Ashton's story, of finding love in the last place anyone would look, and discovering that the heart doesn't care about propriety when it recognizes home.